Let's Not Meet Episode 4. Apparently I was a desirable child. Hey all, I'm M30, a long-time LNM lurker, and I've debated sharing this for a while. A recent post by someone else about attempted kidnapping kinda jogged my memory again. So I figured I'd share my experience. Well, two experiences. This first part one really have no solid recollection of because I was so young. But it's been a story my mom has shared with family and friends over the years. So I've heard about it many times. This would have been in the very early 90s. So I was probably 2 or 3. I don't remember this specific trip, but I do remember our routine of going grocery shopping because my mom would always stop at Wendy's and get me chicken nuggets to eat in the cart. I will also mention that my mom worked nights at this same grocery store, the now defunct Pathmark chain. Anyways, as my mom was going about her business shopping, and I was going about my business tearing up some sweet nuggies, she was approached by an older woman. As I mentioned, my mom also worked here, and while she had countless regulars that would routinely come in the store, she had never seen this woman before. Now, I don't know if this woman wasn't all there, if she had evil intentions, or was just plain lonely. But when she stopped us, it was to ask my mom if she would sell me to her. By her account, my mom said the woman was being dead serious, offering her $10,000 for me. First of all, that's a terrible deal. I'm worth way more than that. Secondly, that's creepy as beep and you're weird as shit. Obviously, my mom turned her down, told her off, and quickly got us the hell away from her. She rushed to the manager's office to report what had happened. Remember, early 90s, no cell phones, but by the time security and/or management went to find her, she was gone. I don't recall from the retelling of the story if the police were involved. I'll have to ask my mom to see if she remembers. And I don't believe my mom ever saw her in the store again. So, luckily, I wasn't tossed up on a register conveyor belt and scanned for $10,000. Unless she did sell me. And it turns out my mom isn't my real mom. Plot twist. Experience number 2. Mid-90s. This one I remember. My mom took me and my older brother to the mall because my brother was and still is a huge sports fan, and they were having a sports card show. If you're unfamiliar, a card show consists of a ton of vendors setting up tables throughout the mall, and they sell cards, autographs, jerseys, etc., anything sports related. Because of this, the mall was a lot more crowded than usual, and having the tables all set up sort of narrowed the general walking area. So, lots of people moving through a tight space. This is an important detail. I also know it was around Halloween because I vividly remember walking with my mom and brother past a Halloween adventure store. My brother had stopped and was looking at something on one of the card show tables. However, I was too distracted by the damn Halloween store because they had all of the really awesome masks on this big wall that was visible from outside the store. Mistake number 1. I hadn't noticed that by this point, my mom and brother had walked a little further down. Not far, but maybe 15 feet away from where we initially stopped near Halloween Adventure. I guess I was still in my mask-gazing trance, in the midst of this crowded and condensed walkway, when I suddenly felt a hand holding mine. Again, I'm still not paying attention. Mistake number 2. So, this hand was pulling me, rather briskly, in the direction we had come from, which struck me as odd. Why were we going back the way we came when there's stuff we hadn't seen yet? This was the question I intended to ask my mom, finally raising my eyes to look at her. Yeah, not my mom. Instead, when I looked up it turned out to be some woman that I've never seen before. The creepy thing is that she never once looked down at me. She's holding me by the hand, pulling me away from my mom at a fairly quick pace, and her gaze is just dead set in front of her, like this bizarre look of determination. This is what terrified me and made me realize I had to break loose ASAP. Even more unsettling, as I wiggled my hand free, her expression still never changed. She still never looked down at me. And once I got my hand free, she did not react. She never spoke a single word. She didn't try to get me again. She just kept walking, at the same brisk pace, as if nothing ever happened. Everything about her was so robotic. I ran back to my mom and brother. Again, this wasn't that far away, and it all happened in a matter of seconds. But I was scared shitless. I vaguely remember grabbing my mom and crying. At the time, I just said I was freaked out because I thought I had lost them. For whatever reason, I was afraid of getting in trouble, so I didn't bring up what happened until later. And by that time, what can you really do? It's funny though, you read all of these LNM stories and it sort of has you recalling different unsettling events throughout your life, and maybe remember things you had long forgotten. You read about stalking and harassment that goes on for years, and it makes you wonder if these experiences are random, or if, for whatever reason, they were all calculated. It's thoughts like this that forced me to re-examine both of those events. And it brought me to one terrifying question. What if it was the same woman? Someone followed me to my car. First, let me start off with some background. I have been going to the gym for about 6 years consistently every single day and mostly in there evenings around 8 or 9 p.m. and my workouts usually last until 10 or 11 p.m. Around summer of 2018, I switched to LA Fitness, which is a really big health club chain, etc. I had been going there for about 6 months when an older man around his 30s, early 40s, I say old because I was 18 at the time and that seemed old to me, began to approach me nearly every single time I was at the gym. He was Hispanic, shorter, around 5'8", and I believe he told me his name. I forgot it, as well as how old he was, which I also forgot. Now, keep in mind I am an 18-year-old 5'2" female, so in the beginning I took his attentions to be friendly and I was friendly back to him, but tried to end conversations quickly because he liked to chat for a long time and I just wanted to get my workouts done. In the beginning, when he first started approaching me, he would tell me he thought I was very beautiful, that he would love to take me out for drinks, etc. He asked for my name and how old I was, which I told him because I thought that was innocent enough. He also told me he had a young daughter with his ex whom he described as psycho, and he told me he would love for me to meet his daughter. Obviously, I brushed all of these invites off and eventually I began to get really annoyed. I would dread showing up at the gym because I didn't want to be approached by him. One day, after about a year of him approaching me nearly every day, regardless of me changing my times of going to the gym, he would spend hours there. An older gentleman who was exercising on a bike behind me noticed this man come up to me. By this time, I had been ignoring the creepy guy every single time he approached me for several weeks, pretending to focus extra hard on my workout and listening to my music. He stood next to me and began speaking, calling my name, trying to get my attention, but I just kept ignoring. After a few minutes, I guess he started feeling awkward and walked away. The gentleman behind me got my attention and told me that he had seen this guy talking to me several times and even watching me work out from a distance every time I was at the gym, and that I should report him and straight up just tell him to leave me alone because what he was doing was harassment. I told him thank you and just decided to brush it off as him just being an extra creepy guy. The next time he tried to approach me, I told him to leave me alone, that I had a boyfriend and that I was not interested. After that, he left me alone. Occasionally, I would work out with one of my friends who told me that she noticed a strange, older, Hispanic man watching me work out at the gym, but I just brushed that off too. I know, I sound really stupid. I truly thought he wasn't a threat, though. Flash forward, December of 2019. I was nearing the end of my workout. It was 11 p.m. when I noticed him at the gym. I didn't think he had spotted me yet, so as soon as I saw him, I decided to cut my workout short and began walking to the front doors of the gym. I had one headphone in and one out, just in case. The gym was relatively empty by that time, and so I was a little nervous to walk alone to my car in the dark, even though I had parked close to the entrance. As I was about to reach the doors, I hear him calling my name. Stephanie, Stephanie. I immediately began to panic and I started walking faster. He, I shit you not, started tapping my back and gripped my arm, still saying my name. By this point some people in the gym had started to pay attention, and I briefly turned to him and yanked my arm away. I ran out of the gym, to my car, locked the doors, and left. He had never done anything like that before, so I was shaken by it. By the time I went to work out again the next day, around 8 p.m., I had talked myself out of being scared and decided I would just keep my eyes open and be extra cautious of him if he showed up. I was working out by the dumbbell area, on the far end of the gym, where the benches are and a mirror spanning the whole wall. Machines and workout equipment were behind me, and through the mirror I could see everything going on. I see him enter and walk to a machine a few feet behind me, and so I began hurrying my workout. I finish a set of an exercise I am doing and I look up into the mirror to see what he is doing and see him smiling at me from his machine into the mirror. I get immediate goosebumps and begin to put all of my equipment away. I avoid looking in his direction or the mirror at all. When I come back to pick up my water bottle, which I had left on the bench I was working out on, I briefly notice someone sitting on the bench next to mine. I look into the mirror to scan my surroundings again, and right next to me is him. Again, staring at me in the mirror. Extremely on edge and nervous by this point, I immediately leave, asking one of the front desk attendants to walk me to my car. I got in my car, locked my doors, and called my boyfriend to tell him what had happened. After 10 minutes of talking in the parking lot, I noticed the big truck directly across from me turn on and turn their brights on straight in my face. I thought it was strange, so I squinted into the light to see who might be in there. It was just the outline of a smaller man. I quickly realized it must have been a guy from the gym, and so I booked it out of there, checking my mirrors to see if anyone was following me. By that time I was shaking and I noticed the truck pulling out of the parking lot and driving behind me. I still couldn't clearly make out who it was, but I was freaking out. I drove almost all the way home, with the same truck still behind me. I quickly realized I couldn't literally just lead him to my house, because out of all the stupid things I had done so far, that would be the stupidest. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot that was lit and really populated and waited to see what he would do. He kept driving past me and I waited 20 minutes before driving home, making sure I was not being followed. After all of that, you would think I would just change gyms and call the police. Well, no. 18-year-old me still denied that it 100% was him or that anything would happen to me. The rest of that week I had had no encounters with him, and so the incident began to leave my mind. The next Tuesday, it was January 2020 now, I was at the gym once again, and around 11 p.m. I had finished my workout and was about to leave. I hadn't really paid attention to whether the guy was there or not, and I scanned the gym once before leaving but didn't see anything. I headed to my car, got in, forgot to lock the doors, and sat there texting my boyfriend, asking when he could call. We were long distance at that time, so we usually called at night. All of a sudden someone starts knocking on my window. I jump slightly and look out my window, and it is him. He starts calling my name, and I see him reaching down to the door handle. Somehow, in those few moments I remember I hadn't locked my doors, and I immediately hit the lock button. The smile that formed on his face is one I will never ever forget. He looked almost smug, like he knew that even that wouldn't help me. He began banging on my window and telling me to unlock and open the door repeatedly. Eventually he moved to pulling on the door handle. In retrospect, I realize my first instinct should have been to call the police. But in that moment, I decided to call my boyfriend. My phone instantly hooked up to my car's Bluetooth and it started to ring very loudly. Even on the outside, I think that's really what saved me. As soon as he heard the ringing, I assume he believed I was calling the police, and he immediately ran away and got into the car one over from mine. He pulled out, and it was the same big truck that had been shining its headlights at me and had followed me almost all the way home a week before. I was shaking with fear and talking to my boyfriend, explaining what had happened, and I also called my mom and told her what had happened. I don't know why, but I never called the police to report it. Mostly because I wasn't sure they would believe me or that I had any evidence to back me up. But I have since then changed gyms, gotten a taser, I work out only during the day, and I look over my shoulder every single time I am somewhere alone. I still wonder what would have happened that night if I hadn't remembered my doors were unlocked. He could have been a rapist, kidnapper, serial killer, sex trafficker, anything, even just a desperate man. Either way, weird gym dude, let's not meet. A grandmother from my preschool stalked and threatened to kidnap me. I recently learned of some chilling details about a person that was heavily involved in my life as a child, and I thought I would share the story. Throughout my childhood, I was extremely shy and did not find myself going out of my way to make friends in new settings. I had recently started preschool at my grandmother's church, and I remember being on the playground playing by myself when a woman introduced herself to me. Her name was Candy, and she looked like any other sweet old woman. She almost reminded me of my own grandmother with her abundance of white curls on her head. Candy was a volunteer at the church and typically watched over the children while they played. So we would see each other fairly often. I can't remember much about the start of this friendship, but I presume one thing led to another before I was frequently spending time with her in and out of school. My parents were grateful to have someone who was interested in watching me, as I was the youngest of three, and my parents worked full-time while also taking my brother and sister to and from school, sports, or friends' houses, so having a helping hand was a blessing for them. To be honest, I don't remember too many details about spending time with Candy, but I suppose we spent our time frequenting ice cream shops, parks, etc. I do have one memory of going to her house, where I had never been before, and as she was showing me around, I remember passing through the dining room and seeing another girl who looked to be around 10 to 12 years old. Candy introduced me to her and told me that she lived down the street and would spend a lot of time at her house. I am not sure why, but I remember being jealous. I guess I was jealous that Candy also cared for and spent time with another little girl. I had never felt that way before, and I'm not sure why I remember that so clearly. For some reason, that was the only time I went to her house. Fast forward a few years, and I am in first grade. I had totally forgotten about Candy and had not seen her since I graduated preschool 2 years prior. My neighbors, who I carpooled to school with, had dropped me off at my house after school one day, and I spotted a Target grocery bag hooked to our front door. I wasn't sure what it could be or why my brother or sister didn't bring it inside when they arrived home from school an hour or so before me. Once I took it inside, I noticed writing on the bag indicating that there was a gift inside for me from Candy. I ran up the stairs to my room, and to my surprise, there were several adorable, brand new outfits inside just for me. I immediately tried them on and was so excited to show my mom when she came home from work. After my mom got home, I eagerly showed her the outfits that Candy had left for me. Unfortunately, my mom was not as excited as I was. In fact, She was quite angry. She yelled at me to take them off, and that she would be returning them to Candy. I was so confused as to why she was upset with me. What did I do wrong? These were free clothes, a gift. Wouldn't it be rude to return a gift to someone? To avoid being punished, I put the clothes back in the bag and handed them to my mother. We never spoke of this again, and Candy slipped my mind for the next several years. A few years ago, my sister was home visiting from college. With nothing else to do, we decided to go to Target to shop for useless things we didn't need. As we were walking through the parking lot, the thought of the Target bag from Candy randomly dawned on me. I proceeded to laugh and asked my sister if she remembered, and if she knew why Mom was in such an awful mood that day to force me to give the clothes back to Candy. My sister stopped dead in her tracks and said, "Wait, do you not remember what Candy did to us?" Taken aback, I shook my head and begged her to tell me what happened. She refused to talk about it and told me to ask my mom. Once again, the thought of Candy slipped my mind, and I didn't remember to ask my mother about what happened until I was in college a few years later. We were saying goodbye to my grandmother after grabbing lunch when she mentioned to my mom that someone's funeral was that weekend. They then sat in silence for a few minutes just staring at each other. After my grandmother left, I asked my mom who they were talking about, and she informed me about Candy's death. The realization that I had never heard the true stories about this woman crossed my mind, and I asked my mom about what my sister refused to speak on. My mother proceeded to relay the horrible stories to me about the little old woman that tried to take me away from my family. At the beginning of the friendship, Candy genuinely was a big help to my family and was someone that they trusted. However, Candy's intentions were questioned by my grandmother, who shared a few of her concerns with my father after hearing some odd stories from her friends at church. She felt as though something was off with Candy, and she didn't like that I spent so much time with her. Coming from a woman who never had a negative thing to say about anyone, my father became slightly wary of Candy, but he assumed that my grandmother was just being overly cautious. After some time of Candy watching over and babysitting me, her demeanor changed and she started acting possessive of me and became hostile towards my parents. She would show up unannounced to our house asking for me, and if I wasn't there, she would become incredibly angry and yell at my parents about how awful they were. She would continuously tell them that they didn't deserve me and only she was worthy of taking care of me. This happened several times before my parents told her to stop coming to the house or they would call the police. This inclined her to start calling the house and leave messages for me, which my parents obviously would not tell me about. In these voicemails, she would cry to me and try to convince me to leave with her and leave my family. She would talk about how awful my parents were and how she could give me a much better life than they could. The voicemails that were intended for me soon turned to threats for my parents. She threatened to call the police or child services to have me removed from the home and placed into her care. She threatened to tell the police about my parents' violence and abuse towards me and my siblings, none of which was true. Once she realized that her phone calls were not working, she began making efforts to show up at the house again. She started by driving up and down our street. Day after day, she would ask our neighbors, and then the neighbors' children, if anyone knew if I was home or where I was. She would park her car and watch our house without anyone really noticing or saying anything. Eventually, our neighbors began recognizing her car and what was going on, and they would inform my parents when she came around asking about me. After some time of doing this, she took it upon herself to come to the front door while only my brother, who was likely only 12 years old at the time, and I were home, and she started banging on the door begging to see me. My brother opened one of the front doors, keeping the storm door between them closed, and told her to leave. She proceeded to plead with him to let her in, and he replied that I was not home, despite me napping soundly upstairs. Cheers for smart 12-year-old brothers. Candy partially forced herself through the door when my brother put his hand in her face, pushing her out of the door, and told her that the police had been called. She left after that and distanced herself for a while before she encountered in the final straw with my mother. One day, my mother and I were backing out of the driveway to attend a birthday party when Candy pulled in behind our car, blocking us from leaving. She came up to the window, and my mother rolled it down ready to tell her off for good. Candy ignored her and looked right past my mother into the back seat where I was sitting. She said to me, "Wouldn't you rather come with me and never see your mom again? I love you so much more than they ever did and can give you everything you want if you come with me." This was the final straw for my mother. She never thought that she would upset or fight with an old woman. But the day had come when it was absolutely necessary. She screamed and yelled at her, making sure to include that Candy would regret the day that she ever came into contact with me or my family again. Something she said must have actually scared Candy, because she drove off and didn't appear in our lives again until the Target bag incident. I'm not sure how I never knew that any of this happened and never thought anything was weird about her when I was a child. But I guess my parents did a good job of shielding me from the horrors of the situation. After hearing about everything that took place, I assumed that there must have been a reason she became so obsessed with me. Did she not have her own family? Did she lose children or grandchildren and wanted to find someone to fill the void? According to my mother, she had several children that were much older than me, as well as young grandchildren. Thus, I'm not sure what would have sparked her interest in me. But thankfully we no longer have to worry about her. Part of me still wonders if I repressed any memories or conversations with her that were upsetting. Did she ever privately talk to me about how awful my parents were or how she wanted to take me away from my family? Did I ever agree to leave with her? I also wonder if as I grew older and joined social media like Facebook, did she ever search my name? Did she ever watch me when I was in middle school, high school, or even when I went away for college? I have so many questions, but I'm glad that we never had to find out if she was going to follow through with any of her threats. As a word of advice, always trust your grandmother's instincts about other grandmothers, and do not befriend the old woman volunteering on the playground. And finally, to the woman who made my parents' lives a living hell, let's not meet again. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more Reddit content.